Good day, sir. How are you?
Hello.
Hi.
Good. Nice to see your shining face.
Nice to see your shining
As
face.
always.
You're too kind. Hey, I didn't ask you before while we were doing our little warm up here. You
Yeah,
got a picture over your left shoulder, it looks like. And from here, I can't tell. It looks like either a painting or
it is.
Japanese inspired.
It's a painting from Bali,
Ah,
and it was done by a Balinese artist, and I saw it and I loved it.
I love it too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. So, what's new and
And
exciting in your
this
world, Mr.
is
Copeland?
a lovely little halo that I purposely
See,
sat behind so you
honestly, we
can
should do
see.
the rest of the shot just like that because
So
then it shows you.
I'm not sure if it looks more like a halo or a crown, but
You
I'm
are
going to hold it
Cyrus
here
the
for like
Great.
5 seconds, and then I think I'm going to move it
Ladies and
slightly to
gentlemen,
the left.
Cyrus Copeland, Cyrus the Great. The only other
Oh boy.
guy who's like me. You said, and I've borrowed this a million times, which I read in your book, your amazing book, Off the Radar. We both have the blood of the great Satan and the axis of evil flowing through our veins.
Yeah.
And I laughed out loud when I read that. Explain to everybody what that means. It's a funny joke, by the way.
Well, I mean, there's been this idea recently on behalf of the U.S. that Iran is part of the axis of evil countries, right? There's Iran, North Korea. Who else is in there? I actually quite forget conveniently.
I think Iraq was in there at the time.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
That makes sense. And then back dating to the revolution when the US was kind of declared the great Satan. And so, yeah, you and I share the lovely distinction of having these two twin veins of evil, cultural evil running through our veins. And I love that, mostly because I love kind of defining myself in contradictory terms. And I search out those definitions in the hopes of being able to hold those contradictions. And in doing so, not just reconciling them, but disproving our ideas of these ingrained ideas that we carry forward about morality, which are so frequently false. So, when I am in Iran, I often feel like I'm an ambassador on behalf of America. And likewise over here on behalf of Iran. And, you know, it's strange, Daryushjan, but in Iran, I often feel like they have a much better understanding of what America and Americans really are. And they're, in fact, if you know this, but they're the most pro-American population in the Middle East. Probably with the exception of Israel, which you wouldn't guess based on the rancor that kind of goes back and forth between our governments. I feel like they understand us more than we understand them. And in
100%.
part, I wrote my book to kind of not just address that, but explore it and reconcile it too. I don't know. How do you feel about being Iranian and American? Is it a point of pride for you, or is it still something that you carry as a sort of, I don't know, geographical cross? How do you feel about it?
Yes, and yes. I'm doing improv exercise with you. Yes, and I feel all those things. It's tiring as fuck to hear the conventional wisdom, and I use wisdom lightly, about what Iran is and what Iran isn't. And I am frequently reminded of what Mark Twain's saying, at least it's attributed to him, I don't know if it's accurate or not, that the fastest way to destroy your prejudice and bigotry is to travel. And the minute that you do travel to another land, and I really recommend you go where they do not speak your language and you have never seen, smelled, or tasted their foods, the most beautiful things happen. So I do feel all those things. I don't like hearing Iran get bashed all the time because, as you know, it's just not accurate. And as you said in your book, when the good doctor is taking care of your foot, your ankle, I believe.
Yeah.
He said, you know, we love the American people. You know, governments are one thing, people are another. And it would be great if we could learn that in our country. I want to say something else real quickly before we go on. Cyrus calls me by my full first name, my Persian name, which is,
Ah. Daryush.
there you go. All right. And John means dear. It's a term of endearment and it's said frequently. So I would say Cyrus John. I don't call him Cyrus in Farsi. We say Cyrus.
Yeah.
So I would
Yeah.
say Cyrus John. Salam Cyrus John.
Salam.
Salam. And he speaks Farsi much better than me, by the way.
I'm not sure about that. I can say this: you probably have the accent down pat, but
you know,
probably
it's
have
weird.
most accents down pat. Being an actor,
I do have that facility for accents.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people and you know, people give you they give you a wide berth when you can say, instead of saying, you know, salam, you say salam. They're like,
right?
oh, you speak perfectly. Oh my God. You know, and that whole thing.
Hey, what
happens.
did you mean when you said, I mean, I know what you meant about going to a place where they don't speak English. I don't think I've done that, where at least people haven't spoken English in some cursory way.
Well,
have you?
There we go. That's a whole conversation. American imperialism. Yeah, everybody speaks a little bit of English, but it's not their mother tongue. And
Right.
I think just going, for example, you said you went to Bali and got that artwork. Of course, they speak English there, but that's not their mother tongue. And
Yeah.
just that experience in and of itself, the first, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour that you've landed in Bali off the plane and you've gathered your belongings and gotten through customs, that's going to make your head go poof, like, oh my God, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Right? What's happening?
Yes.
And thus begins the journey and the beauty of travel and the breaking down of the walls in your mind, which are nothing but an illusion anyway, right? So that's
We're
what I
lucky
meant.
that way. I mean, we have these colonialists' baggage that we've carried forward into the world in unfortunate ways. But as tourists, we've benefited from the proliferation of English, and that's why I wondered: had you actually been any place where they didn't speak English? If that's even possible these days.
I mean, yeah, I've been in parts of Mexico. I don't know English.
Really?
None whatsoever. That's just Mexico. That's just, a couple of
Son of
hundred
a gun.
miles. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, most places everyone speaks English, everyone, because they have to, because the international language of business, for better or worse, is English.
Yeah.
And so, if they want to do commerce, if they want to put a roof over their head, food in their belly, protect their families, et cetera,
yeah,
you got to at least know how to say, hello, mister, how are you? It was a common refrain in Iran.
Especially strolling through the bazaar, right?
Always. Mister American, hello, how are you? Turn around and I would answer back in Farsi.
See, exhibit A, the perfect Farsi American accent. Well done.
That's how I learned how to speak English. I've the story I've told a few times. I came here when I was about a little over 2 years old. I guess 2 years old, because the twins were born on my second birthday. And we're at my grandmother's house in Montpelier, Idaho, which is southeast Idaho. And it's probably about that big around. It's maybe 2,000 people in the town. And so here comes this tow-headed, I had like blue-green eyes at the time and blonde hair. And I had this long, funny name. Dar hadn't been invented yet. I was outside playing and someone brought orange juice, or I don't know. I heard the word, so I went inside and like, Grandma, I want 1 glass orange juice. And she's like, honey, Margine, what's he saying? Honey, what's he saying? Orange juice. And she's like, he wants orange juice.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you something. I can't believe that we got to 50 some odd years of friendship. And I'm telling you this, my first words in the whole world were operative, which is orange juice.
Orange juice. But
in Farsi. That was the first thing I said. Dude.
Really? Operative.
And yeah. And here too, P.S.
Well, it's good stuff. Kids like it. It's sweet and it's
It
colorful.
really is.
Orange, you glad? See, I'm representing. Ha
Yeah, you
ha
are.
ha. So you have the inverse of me. I have the Iranian father and the American mother, and yours is the American father and the Iranian mother. Tell people a little bit. Why don't you, instead of me talking so much, you tell people how we met, how we know each other, and because it's an interesting story, and then we can kind of segue into the book, which is just like
Yeah, I'm happy to
great
do that.
book.
I'll also
Yeah.
tell you that something you already know, which is that I also ask a lot of questions, and I'm probably better at asking questions than answering them. So,
Oh, I'm aware. No, I
okay.
don't mean that in a bad way, but that's one of the things I love about you is you're so inquisitive,
Yeah,
and
I think
most
it's a
intelligent
writerly thing,
people.
honestly.
Pardon?
I think that's a writerly thing, this propensity to just keep asking why.
Yeah, yeah. I've done
And
that my entire life. I always want to ask questions. I always get my friends. As I look back at my life and I think about up to this point, it'll continue to go on. I make my friends uncomfortable because I would always ask more questions.
oh,
Shut up! Shut up!
really?
Shut up! Oh yeah, yeah,
That's so
yeah.
weird because I always think that people who ask the questions ask it because of an inherent interest in wanting to get to know you or how you think or how you feel.
Right,
Um, and it's true. I actually ask those questions because I'm genuinely curious about that.
right,
Um,
right.
okay, so yes, my mom is Iranian. She left Iran at the tender age of 17
Oof.
to learn, not learn English. She actually knew English from her studies, but to become to study more English in England. And she ended up becoming not just an announcer for the BBC, but also, interestingly, back in the 50s, a model for a department store. And there was a whole host of interesting lifestyles that went along with that. My dad, conversely, was an Okie who grew up on a ranch and also left home at the tender age of 17, 18. No, sorry, 21. He left home after college and took a trip around the world with a professor of his who it turned out was grooming a lot of his students to become CIA recruits. So he had a year plus experience, and he decided when he was on his trip that instead of going back to Oklahoma, he was actually going to stay abroad. Like he loved travel so much and the exploration of other countries and cultures so deeply that he just changed the narrative in the middle of the itinerary and said, I'm going to stay in Thailand, and did that. They eventually both met back in Washington, D.C., where on the very first day of their respective arrivals in Washington to study, my mom at Georgetown, my dad at George Washington, my father approached my mother over breakfast, and to hear my mother tell the story, had the temerity to ask if she always enjoyed the luxury of a late breakfast. That was his opening line.
That is
And
classic Shahin Copeland. That is so classic.
yeah.
Who are you and why are you speaking to me? But to be
You
fair,
know my mom.
I know her. I adore her.
Yeah.
To be fair, it was a different time. And, she's a beautiful woman. And like, who are you? And is this another clown trying to run game on me?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
use the colloquial. Yeah. Sorry to
So that was the
interrupt.
beginning. And that was the beginning of their life together and the family that they begot, myself and my
Right.
sister. And when I was 10 years old, we all moved to Iran. And that's where we had the great good privilege of making friends with the Gujarati clan.
Good.
I don't remember, was it when you guys were already there, right, Daryush, in 74?
Wow. Okay. I love talking with Cyrus. He knows my first name and my last name. Dixon, for anyone who cares or is listening or ever wondered, is
Okay.
my middle name. Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. There's no shame in it. I had to change my name from Bujarchi to my middle name Dixon because the alliteration of Dar Dixon, DD, right? And it just makes it easier for, white people to say my name.
Yeah.
Big smile, big cheesy smile. Um, I think as I remember back, we were there, but I don't know, man. I think you guys, I think we kind of got there around the same time. We got there in mid 74, summer of 74. For me, going back, my brother's the first time really.
Okay.
So when did you guys get there?
The
Do you
winter
remember?
of '74.
Okay, so then we were there. Okay, we were there. But
Yeah,
our family spent a lot of time together,
yeah,
um, for, a number of different reasons. Uh, I think not the least of which was that, you and your sister look like white folk, as do we.
yeah.
But yet there's this very Persian thread, biology, genetics, ties to the land. And so we would go and visit each other's homes and have dinner and, go to lunch, and we'd take, I think we even took a few day trips. I don't remember exactly. You talked about it in your book, going into the mountains and stuff.
So yes, we did take day trips. We went to Persepolis together. We hung out at Hotel Darjush together as well, outside of Persepolis. Do you remember that?
Yes. Holy
Just
shit.
vaguely, right?
Yeah, just vaguely. We did go to, yeah, we went to Jamshid Persepolis, right? Wow. Okay, keep going. This is good.
More frequently, I think we would just kind of come to visit you guys. You lived inside of a gated compound, um,
Uh,
and
yes, we did.
we
You know what? I've
let you
told
like
this
that.
story a few times to my wife. That was a weird place to live, was it not?
It was an unusual place to visit.
Had guards at the
It was
gate
an unusual place to visit. Yeah, guards
saluting
at the
you as
gate.
you'd come in, right?
Yep. Yeah.
That, and you're
Yeah.
first like, what's going on, right? And then,
Yeah.
and they're in uniform, they're in full uniform. Um, and then you went into
What
this.
was that place, Darius?
I think what happened was that Iran Electronics Industries, which my father headed in Shiraz, where we lived, it's one of the biggest city in the south of Iran, Shiraz, or as a lot of people like to say, Shiraz, which is not right. I think they bought that so that they could house the families as they came from various parts of the world.
Okay.
Both Americans, Brits, Aussies. I'm trying to think what other countries were there. There were a lot. Chinese, Germans, whatever. And then I don't know if you remember. Well, you didn't go to the same school I did. Your mother headed another school. I forget the name of it.
The Shiraz International Community School.
Right. Okay. So you all went there because your mother was the headmistress,
the principal
of it.
Yeah.
Principal. And
to
we
my
went
everlasting dismay.
I
did not enjoy that. And also, here's another reason we didn't enjoy it, because the IEI school routinely kicked our asses in all organized sports, every one of them, all the time.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh man. Okay, that's no fun. Even if you're not into sports, yeah, watching your school get trounced. I was frequently in schools that were the trouncees, so I feel for you. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. But that whole compound was for that. And in the beginning, for the first year before they built the big school on the outskirts of town, it was in one of those. It was in 3 of those buildings. And so that was just weird. Yeah, it was weird because there's the street, there's the home we lived in, and then right across the street, and it was, just like no big deal, just a little tiny street in this compound. I don't know what else to call it. There was school. So I could never get away from school for the first year.
Son of a gun.
And it was,
right.
It was like, all I would say to my parents all the time, I can say anything I want, it's my show. It's like, what the fuck? Can we please get out of here? Be patient. We're building a school, blah, blah, blah. And like, can we move? Well, we never moved. We never moved, which was terrible for me, because I would listen to my American friends and not too many of the Iranians that went to the school. There were a few, but it was mostly Americans. And it was like going to private school, as you can attest with the school you went to, your mother ran. You got a great education, so yay. But I lived a completely different life than my American classmates did. So they were jumping in taxis and going to the bazaar or going to Chin Chin A, that little restaurant, right? Okay. And they're just like, they're traveling the city and they're living a life. And like, all I would hear from my parents was how dangerous it would be for me to go out
Really?
there. Yeah, which
Why
I
did they
didn't
think that?
understand. Well, Dad was pretty, his position was pretty, you know, at a position of power. Um, and and since it was, we're in Shiraz and we're in Iran, that company was a part of the what do they call it? Ministry of War, which is the Department of Defense in this country.
Okay.
So he and I think the lieutenant governor who ran the city, they don't have mayors, were like 1 and 2 positions of getting stuff done.
I see.
And well, I mentioned this to you before. There was a gentleman who used to come to our house we were in a Muslim country, so it's flipped around. Sunday is not the holy day. Friday is the holy day in Iran. And he would come every Friday, late afternoon, early evening, with a big smile on his face, bearing gifts because he wanted my father to rent out one of his buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the Persian way. That's just how it goes, And he knows that you're not going to get on one ask. And I mean, that brother must have come, dude, a year and a half every single Friday.
Well, yeah.
Every Friday, he'd come with jam. He would come with pistachios. He would come with, fruit. He would come with teas. He would come with, every time, and always incredibly gracious with a big smile on his face. Very nice guy. That's.
So did you feel kind of imprisoned by circumstance in that way, Dariush? Or
100%. I like how you've turned the tables on me and asked questions. It's good.
I'm
it's
sorry.
Good.
It's
no, it's good. I like it. It's good because it's a give and take.
Yes,
yeah,
it
I
is.
did. 100%.
Yeah.
Dude, you saw where we lived. For Christ's sake, I've got armed guards at 1, 2. So there were 3 entrances, but they only used 2. And one of them was right out my bedroom window. I could see the place. And, the crazy thing was that was near the airport, that compound. I don't know if you remember that or not, but it was next to the Shiraz International Airport.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're like maybe 1.5 kilometers from the airport. Never really heard the jets or anything. That was never an issue, which was interesting. I just thought about that. But beyond that compound that we were in, I got to see the everyday people of Shiraz. And it wasn't like Shiraz is, like I say, a major metropolitan city. There were about 1 million people back then, but these people were poor. And so it was just weird, really weird. Here's this white face and his little brothers, white faces running around, speaking English.
Yeah.
Armed guards protecting him. God help the son of a gun who tried to talk to us, because the guard would, interact because he was told, to protect us at all costs. Anyway.
It's like having a Secret Service detail, your own private detail. I'll tell you what I remember about I don't remember much about the compound. I remember your family and the Khwaja Nasiri family. And the thing I loved about your house was that it was filled with all kinds of American furniture and tchotchkes. And I love that. I love the sleeper sofas. You guys had some beautiful floral sleeper sofas.
Good
you
memory.
had a shag rug, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You had some macrame plant holders, which is so 70s.
Hey, baby, we came from Santa Cruz, California.
Yeah, you did, and you brought
lots
the
of hippies.
And you also had a God's eye. Do you remember back when they were making God's eyes? Do you know what that is?
Ojo de Dios.
That little cross with the yarn. That's
That's
you had a beautiful God's eye. I think maybe your mom made.
No,
was on the wall.
I'll tell you where that's from. We lived in Los Alamos, New Mexico, right before we moved to Iran. And that's where they call now the National Scientific Laboratories. Back then, it was called the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratories. And it is the laboratories, the location, the reason they became that, because that's where Oppenheimer was sent to create the atomic bombs.
Oh, wow.
Right. So there's a heavy Indian influence there, and a heavy Latino influence, Mexican, and a lot of Indian native people. And that Ojo de Dios, eye of God, which is a cross of yarn, and the center is like, an eye, but it's a diagonal, and then it just gets bigger. You can make them big or small, and they're made with colorful yarns. And if you're really talented and good at it, you can make some amazing designs with the yarn. But they're everywhere in Los Alamos. And so, and I love those things. Yeah. Just because
awesome.
it looks beautiful.
They really
and,
did.
you know,
Very striking.
Yeah.
I remember it 50 some odd years later.
Wow, 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 wow. You know, this is a perfect little segue here. Now, I didn't know this until, what, like 2 or 3 years ago when we were speaking, that you are a Muslim. You practice Islam. I never knew that. And you're like, yeah, I did. You didn't know that? I'm like, nope, did not know that.
Did you assume I was Christian? Or
I didn't assume anything. I just didn't know you were, you know, I never took you as religious in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Ever. But of course we were kids.
Because I don't make a practice of talking a lot about it unless people engage me, and then I'm very happy to kind of chew over matters of philosophy and theology. I love that stuff. I love religious stuff. I love spiritual stuff. But yeah, you're right. It's not something that I kind of advertise. I was raised Muslim. My mom raised, and my dad actually converted to Islam when he married my mom.
Did not
that
know
might have been
either.
a package deal. I don't know. I think that he, you know, he was an only child, Daryush, and I think that he never said this to me, but I just assumed that he liked the idea of a religion that's kind of rooted in a sense of brotherhood and equality, is my guess about that. Yes, I am a somewhat practicing Muslim. Like I pray every day. I have not fasted in a very long time. In fact, the last time I fasted was actually for for a Hindu holiday in Bali, where they had the night of Shiva. And the last time I fasted was in summer camp in Iran, and that experience did not end well because I ended up in the hospital. And with an IV attached, with an IV drip, after not even a full day of fasting. So I thought fasting, just for one reason or another, it's not for me. But
that would put a slant on anybody.
So many decades later, I thought I would try it again, and I did it in Bali, and that's one of the things that makes me a not so observant Muslim. But yeah, I consider myself a Muslim. I think basically anybody who you know, if you say you're Muslim, that's how you see yourself in the world. That is how I see myself in the world. Islam these days is a vulnerable religion that is under a lot of judgment and criticism and attack for all the reasons that, you know, need not be stated here. And so in the same way that I feel really proud to be an Iranian in America and an American in Iran, I feel vested with the idea of being an ambassador on behalf of Islam to the world. And maybe in living my life, I hope disproving to people whatever inborn prejudices they might bring to their idea of my religion.
Woo, boy, that's a lot of weight to carry, man.
I don't think too much about it. I just kind of do it, which is why I'm not ceaselessly surprised when people are surprised that I'm a Muslim, but people are surprised that I'm a Muslim. And I'm still a little bit surprised that they're surprised that I'm a Muslim, and I wonder why that is. You're not the only one. People are just surprised.
I understand. I completely understand. It's, you know, it's like you're one of the few people that I know. You know, you're a white male. You're even taller than me. You're 6'4" or 6'4.5".
I'm 6'4". Yeah,
6'4". So I'm 6'3".
Okay.
On a good day.
You carry yourself like 6'4", 5", though.
Goddamn right I do.
Well. Yeah.
But yeah, no, you got, like, I remember when you came, you were here in LA. How many years ago has that been for the book?
5.
Damn. Yeah. So you were here. I met you downtown at the Last Bookshop, which is an amazing bookstore.
Is it still standing? Good.
It's still standing. I don't know how. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they shut the doors down.
That was an amazing bookstore. I mean, there are so few bookstores that don't hew to the idea of what bookstores are supposed to be, but my God, that was one of them.
Right. I mean, literally that, 100%. And it was an old bank, because there was a bank vault in there. I don't know if you got a chance to see that or not, because you were on
I
stage.
remember.
Okay. But when you came up to me, I was like, God damn, homie got tall. Because
I think I
last
thought
time
the same about you.
Did you
I
really?
mean, you were always taller than I was because you were a little older. But yeah,
Yeah, we were
always seemed
kids.
so
We're
tall to me.
teenagers.
And also, going back a little bit too, Ron, you had a motorcycle that you used to ride around on. That, by the way, I got to tell you, that is my sister's #1 memory of you on the motorbike, and you took her around on the motorbike, I think, apparently. Yes. I always kind of got by skating on your brother Bijan's red skateboard, but Kat even got the full Bajarchi treatment with the motorcycle.
I had a Yamaha 80, which is the smallest bike they make.
Yamaha.
It's just, yeah, it was. And let me tell you, I think that's where I realized that I had the capacity to be a good salesperson, because my mother's an ER nurse and was an ER nurse for many years.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. So I was like, hey, Ma, I want to get a mini bike when I was like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever I was. And it was just no. And instead of, not only did I get no, you're not going to get it, which is just, soul crushing to, the young kid who wants to get the bike. But then I would get the horror stories of the trauma and accidents and crushed this and broken that and torn off this. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? And so finally, I don't know, for whatever reason, my father relented and got me this Yamaha 80. And man, I mean, it was the coolest thing in the world. Silver tank, black seat, and I would just buzz around on that bike because there was no one there at that compound was pretty big. Yeah. It was big, so there was no one there, and I'd rip up and down the streets, and I did not wear a helmet, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah,
see, it's that whole picture that made me think that you were just always going to be older and bigger and taller and more mature than I was ever going to hope to be.
I get it. Yeah. So that was a weird and wonderful moment when we both ran into each other. Like, God, we're both older men now, aren't we? And you got a chance to meet Donzale.
That was so great.
Yeah, she's pretty great. But then so are you, which is why you're here. So tell people a little bit about the book, the first book. I know you're working on another one. Let's talk about that. Because not only are you a very, and you know me, you've known me since we were kids. I am not prone to blow smoke up your backside, but I love the way you write, and I love the way you turn a phrase. And it's clear that you put a lot of thought into the subject matter. And so the first one, Off the Radar, that you wrote and traveled the country promoting it 5 years ago, and is the Chautauqua Book Club award winner.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a good moment for me. I got to say, I love that.
Oh, come on. They don't just hand those things out every day.
No, it was good. It was a good moment for me.
Yeah. It just really great. So I'm looking forward to your new book. But explain about Off the Radar, why the title, and what made you do what you did.
Maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, I was in the living room with my mom, and we came across a file. I'd actually been looking for something else entirely, but from the bottom of this dusty box that had not been opened in a very long time, which had traveled with us Copelands through 4 successive houses and ended up in the Philadelphia suburbs, I found this file. And on the file, it said Max's Radar Affair, and in my mother's cursive. And we opened it, and into our laps spilled the contents of a 35-year-old international incident involving my family. And, there was a newspaper clipping from the Tehran Times saying how my father, who was a CIA agent, was going to be tried. There was a letter from my mother to then President Bani Sadr asking for his help in reviewing and freeing my dad. there were packing lists involving work that my father had done for Westinghouse back then. And all this time, there had been the question of whether or not my father was a CIA agent. And I dismissed the question in my head and heart because it seemed ridiculous to me. My father, yes, is an American. He doesn't speak Farsi that well. He was an academic, very bookish. He loved Iran. He loved Iran. And the cocktail of all these things made me think that the idea of him as a CIA agent was ridiculous. My mother, however, had a different idea about that. And so I decided then and there, 35 long years after this incident had transpired, that I was going to get to the bottom of this matter of whether or not he, in fact, was a spy. And that was the question that launched the whole narrative that my book follows. I found a lawyer who had gone toe-to-toe with the CIA before to help me out pro bono in getting the files pertaining to my father released. I took a trip back in time, not only back to Iran, through my father's diaries and also my mother's stories, and also back to his hometown in Oklahoma. I went all in search of the answer to this question of whether or not Dad was a spy. My father had been arrested in 1979 by the revolutionaries. He was arrested because they found some radar that had been hidden in a trunk containing household goods that my father ostensibly was shipping out of the country. Radar that, by the way, belonged to the Iranian military and was paid for by them, getting shipped back to the US. He was detained along with the radar and imprisoned. And when we discovered where he was, my mother realized that this was going to be a whole huge thing. And this was also right around the time that the hostages had been taken in the US Embassy. And so the political temperature was really super high. There was a lot of anti-Americanism going on.
Really?
When my mom tried to find a lawyer to represent my father before the revolutionary tribunal, she couldn't. And so she decided that she was going to do something which at any time would have been remarkable, but rather back then was unthinkable, which is that she was going to represent him. Now, as you know, my mom doesn't have any training in the law. She is an academic by trade and a linguist. But she would come home every night and study the Quran, which was the new canon of law at that time, right? That version of the law that you and I are used to, the Western law, out the window. And she eventually ended up putting together a case based solely on Quranic teachings to present before the court in representing my father and defending him and doing so. And I won't say how the trial turned out, but it was very interesting for me as an Iranian American, as her son, as somebody who has heard this story so many different times. But when you sit inside of your own narrative for the first time and you kind of pick it apart and you pull at threads that didn't make sense back then, but with the advent and perspective that 40 years brings, all of a sudden gets you rather astonished at the legacy that you have inherited. And so in this way, not only was I able to kind of solve this question, which set me on the quest, but also in some sense, Dariush, to get to know my father in a new way that I hadn't known him. He was long since deceased. And when I began the project, it was approximately the same age that he was when he began this particularly dark chapter in his life. And in sitting inside that chapter and in the retelling of it from his perspective as an American, from my mother's perspective as an Iranian, and from my perspective as a bicultural kid who's having a difficult time holding the contradictions of his identity, all of a sudden you kind of see the kaleidoscope of your life and your family narrative shift. And you realize that this was an extraordinary story that took place against the backdrop of an iconic time that not only launched Islamic fundamentalism on an unready world, but which was the foundation for America's long enmity with Iran. That still goes on to this day. It was my hope merely to just kind of answer the question of whether or not my dad was CIA. All the other things that happened, the kind of personal healing that happens when you begin to delve into your own story, that was kind of icing on the cake for me, and blessings that I had not anticipated.
Wow, that's a mouthful. See, thoughtful, very thoughtful, very, yeah, you know, I've begun, I told you this, excuse me, off camera in a phone conversation, that I started to play with the idea of writing a book. And then it's just such a big gargantuan task about my life thus far, because there's just been so many. I look back on it and there's so many different chapters of my life. I'm going to pause just 1 second, just a moment.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. That, you know, I don't know how to tell it. And in telling it, it's this, what you just said, you start to unpack this story that you've lived under, right? It's just the narrative. And the kaleidoscope starts to shift. It's really true. You're looking through that kaleidoscope and all of a sudden colors start falling different ways and the new patterns emerge. And it's pretty profound. And I'm sure writers are sitting there like, yeah, duh. But for me, it's a new thing. And you just explained it very nicely. And it's a lot. And then when you add in the factor, like you said, this is an international incident. I mean, to use the California vernacular, bro, it's a whole thing to deal with. I know a little bit about it because, you know, my wife grew up with a front seat to the civil rights movement. And, you know, there's a lot I don't talk about what I went through. Like, you know, just first time I ever talked about publicly for everyone in the interwebs of the world, you know, that, you know, I had armed guards and a driver and, you know, protect, like it was crazy. It was a whole thing. It's unusual. I can say, and I've told you this, reading your book answered so many questions for me that were never answered for whatever reason. And a lot of it is just because my folks don't know how to use their words, or they weren't aware of, or they didn't ask questions. Because again, you and I are the question askers. Most folks aren't like that. So I think it was kind of a mixture of those things. But, you know, when I read your book, it was like a healing for me. And I didn't even realize it. I didn't even realize it. I had no idea. And then I told you, you know, I saw you when you were in Iran to go do research and kind of like just to go visit too. You know, you're walking through the bazaar with your damn iPhone and you're speaking in English, walking through the bazaar. And first of all, just to see the bazaar like that in high definition, I haven't seen it.
Right?
I haven't seen it. And all of a sudden, I could smell. You walked by, you know, the stand of peste and like, the nuts and the seeds. I'm speaking Farsi, sorry. And then you walk by the Khali Furushi, the carpet sellers, and I could smell the carpets. Didn't want to do that.
Scents,
I miss it,
John. Me too.
I miss it. I miss, you know, fuck. I didn't mean to get choked up. I miss it. The first sounds or the first smells. See? You know, 58 years old, that shit leaves a mark. And, you know, I've been able to go back and I saw your white ass walking through the bazaar and just like, lo-de-do-de-do-de-do. And then you went flip from English into Farsi. And you know, and this, and nothing speaks volumes of, and I guess you have to be able to speak Farsi to understand it. There wasn't a hint of animosity. Who the F are you? Get the F away from me. In the bazaar merchant who started speaking to you in Farsi. He was as gracious and warm and kind as he could possibly be. And that just like, my wife's like, what's wrong? And I was over there. No, I can't talk right now. I'll tell you in a minute. But yeah, man, I miss it. I do. I
That's
miss it.
why, apropos of walking through the bazaar, there's that scene in Argo where they show the Americans walking through the bazaar. And I look American. I'm tall like Americans are. There's no real mistaking me for an Iranian, although I can speak Farsi. That scene, it lasts for all of 30 seconds, but it reinforces every single negative
I'll apologize.
stereotype that Iranians have had to bear. And the truth of it is that it's just not true. It's
Not
just
true
not
at
true.
all. It's not true at all.
And it's why, although I loved Argo, which is an otherwise really good, muscular movie that I think actually was shot, didn't they shoot it in Los Angeles using the airport as,
Probably.
didn't they
I
build
don't.
Tehran at the Los Angeles airports?
I don't know the full story behind it. There's
Okay.
just no way they're gonna. The movie business, they say you shoot night for day. It's the middle of the day or the middle of the night, and you're shooting a day, or vice versa. So in lieu of going to Iran and saying, "Hey, we're going to make a movie," yeah, you build a Mehrabad
In
airport
Los
here.
Angeles.
Yeah.
Not in Syria, not in Lebanon. They built Iran in Los Angeles. That's just something.
That's a mouthful.
I otherwise really did like that movie, but that movie, I resented that movie too. As an Iranian,
I resent pretty much every movie about Iran.
Yeah, there's not a lot of
do.
truths that are told these days about that. And
So let me tell
that
you.
was one of the other things that I wanted to do, is just kind of tell the real truth about the Iranian country, the richness of its culture, the purity of the Iranian heart, and the culture of hospitality that they bring to bear in everybody who crosses over the border and has the great good fortune of being able to know what it's like to be in Iran.
True. They're the most gracious, friendly, welcoming people. And, yeah, of course, we're both biased, but I've done a lot of travel, as have you, and I've lived all over this country. And I can tell you right now, I've never met an American anything remotely as close to gracious and providing of hospitality as I have in Iran, ever. Didn't matter if they were from the highest echelons or if they were villagers, on their donkey, herding the goat or whatever it was, always really gracious. So yeah, it's great.
Truly.
You just reminded me in terms of movies, when I first met Donzale, my wife, there was a movie that was old. It had been done before, because we met in the kind of the late 90s, 97, early 97. She had seen Not Without My Daughter. The Sally, I feel you. The Sally Fields and Alfred Molina movie. And I'm watching that and I'm like, seriously, you can all just eat a big bag of dicks. Honestly, just all go straight to hell. I'm so tired of this. But, it was in the vein of post 79 revolution and the hostage situation. So, Iran, evil, bad. Anyway.
Well, Iran was also, I remember seeing that movie here when I came, thinking that this would be a way to kind of, for me, re-experience what it was like being back in Iran, missing it as I did, and being subsequently horrified by what happened on screen, which hewed to every bad stereotype that ever existed. And
it's cheap. It's cheap. It's the cheapest, laziest storytelling in the world. And I understand why it gets done from a financial perspective. And it's just as artists and as filmmakers, it's inexcusable to bring your bigotry and prejudice, and let's just be honest, ignorance to bear on something that is going to be lauded as a historic document. Not that it is. We all know that movies aren't historic documents. And yet we'll say, yeah, I saw that in that movie. Like Iranians, they beat their women. My wife used to ask me, she's like, my friend said I shouldn't see you because, you guys beat your women.
So she had seen that in the theater, and
I don't
had
know.
kind of accepted that that's the way it is, right? Because
Well,
movies are really real to people who sit in the theater in the dark and really absorb what's happening on screen, and we
well, let's
absorb.
be honest. So in my book, part of it, is me. One of the chapters, major chapters of my book, is escaping a cult, and in that, the healing part of it, no one wants to hear about it, but to unpack brainwashing that occurs is no small feat. Easily the thing I'm most proud of in my life is being able to have not only extracted myself from that, but to have worked my way through it and healed myself of that. When you're in a movie theater, I mean, that's a pretty profound and pronounced hypnotic event. And I can hear some people clicking their tongues or rolling their eyes, but that would be based out of, forgive me, ignorance and not understanding the topic of what hypnosis is, what mind control is, what the power of imagery, the power of music, the volume of sound, whether it be loud or soft, or it's very powerful. So when you do get in those theaters and see these bad narratives, and we're talking about Iran, we could easily talk about Central America, or we could easily talk about, you name any country, and you're going to get a bigoted narrative, and it's not accurate, but there you are.
They have, yeah. I wanted to ask you something, Dariush, which is, you were talking a little bit about how to structure your book. Do you know what the through line of your book is?
I don't. I don't.
If you can figure that out,
I think I do. I take that back. I know that's where the rubber meets the road, right?
yeah.
I do. I shouldn't say that. I do have the narrative, but I'm not comfortable talking about it yet because it's still being sussed out in my mind how I'm going to tell it.
Okay.
And the book is going to support the movie, which is going to support this podcast, which is going to support, an augmented reality, for virtual reality, documentaries, reality television, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because as I've learned in my life, and I don't know, maybe you can speak about this with yours, because, having to unpack, was my father a spy for the CIA? Did that happen? Like, that's profound, right? In unpacking that, you realize that nothing happens in a bubble. And that's part of looking through that kaleidoscope.
Mm-hmm.
And that in that vein of nothing happens in a bubble, you begin to start, you tell me what it's been like for you. I've begun to realize as I've gotten older that there are no separations between myself and anything that I experience. And frequently, I'm trying to be nice about it here, but anything that I find disdain in someone else is that part of myself, which I have not owned. Yeah. So anyone who has ever seen me rant away on Twitter, which, by the way, I've gotten suspended permanently twice. Thank you very
Congratulations.
much. Well, yeah, and I was raging against the orange man, the bad orange man, in my own way as a form of performance art, which seems to escape people sometimes because they think performance art is like, I don't know, an old Devo concert with a planter upside down on your head that's painted red and going, whip it good, But if you ever see me on Facebook, I'll do the same thing, raging against the machine. But the thing is, there's no separation. So when I rail against Donald Trump, for example, I'm fully aware as I'm railing against him that part of myself that I have not owned is that part of him that I disdain.
Yeah.
And it's like that with everything. Just
Isn't that
everything.
Interesting?
Right?
I love that moment. I love that moment.
It's profound. It's like I mean, I have done many drugs in my life, never injected anything. Thank God I'm not an addict or an alcoholic, because it could have gone that way really easily. But when I did hallucinogenics, well, I did mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time I experienced that, the shape shifting of your mind and your consciousness, and realizing that's the first time I caught a glimpse of it. But I got to be honest with you, it pales in comparison to being stone cold stone cold sober and having that realization. But that's my weirdness. There you go.
So I was actually going to ask you about mushrooms earlier when you were talking about how there is little to distinguish you from the rest of the world, how there's just that boundary between you and the rest of the world is there, but it's kind of not there at the same time. It's because we live in a relative world, it's an illusory boundary, but it's a boundary nonetheless. I've never done mushrooms, but it's the one part of the hallucinogenic experience that interests me profoundly, is what happens when that happens, when you feel that you're just really part, that like your ego drops away and you feel this sense of connectedness with everything that's happening around you. I have never experienced that, not that I can recall, but I sense the truth of that. And when you're talking about how to kind of put stuff into form, as you're kind of thinking about this, about your book and how to tell the story, I want to kind of give you more than a gentle push in that direction of seeing how many different ways you can kind of tell your story from how many different perspectives. One of those ways will resonate with you the most, and then just follow that, and then forget about all the ways that you see this happening, all the different mediums. All you need is one true medium for this to exist in, and then the rest, I hope for you, and I bet it does, will just follow.
It will. No, you're 100% right. You know, because you've gone through the process. Birthing any kind of creation, whether it be a book or a film or a piece of artwork, you know, a painting, music, song, lyrics, whatever it is, your dance is a really, I mean, that's a true religious experience in my point of view. I think religions are, yeah, it is. It really is. I wish more people would remember that. And not as a child, get in touch with your inner child. For the love of Christ, we're adults now. You know, get in touch with it as an adult, and bring that same curiosity to it. And as you just so well said, start playing with it by telling it in different voices from different perspectives. Here, underneath, in this ear, through these eyes, out through the back of your head, whatever. And in doing that, you're going to find something that resonates with you. And it sounds like just so much blah, 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 blah. And I don't like to talk about things like this very often, but it's profound. And in that process, I swear to you, you will, I don't even know how to put it. I feel closer to all that is and all that was and all that ever will be through the creative process than sitting in any mosque, synagogue,
and
church,
you know why that is,
temple.
Darius John, is because in doing that, in telling the story, in surrendering yourself to your own story, you're also surrendering yourself to the artistic impulse and instinct, and in some way, I think, to this divinity, this creative divinity that propels all of us, propels the universe, propels the systems that define life. All of that is rooted inside that singular act of creationism and surrendering to that. We artists, we writers, we actors know how to do that, and we know what it feels like. There's nothing like it when you realize that you're in the middle of something that belongs to you but isn't yours. You don't possess it, it has possessed you. And all you want to do is to just pull at that thread and follow it, and let that character as an actor kind of continue to find expression inside of you. There's nothing like that experience of surrender to that, which is interesting to me. I'm going to kind of jump a little bit as a Muslim, because the thing about Islam that I love is this idea of surrender to God. We use this word surrender in very defeatist ways. And the implication being that if we do surrender to anything, we are laying down because we've been defeated and raising a white flag. Yes. I think of surrender as this ultimate act of faith, of letting something else, some other impulse, be it a divine impulse or your muses or another character, come and live inside of you for a little bit and just seeing where that goes. There's magic in that. There's magic in that.
I agree. And I would say, in addition to that, what I noticed is in that surrender, I don't think of it in those terms, but I like that a lot, because that's what you do. I said do. I almost went into Beavis and Butthead, but I resisted. That's what happens when you do that, is that you do surrender. Now, for me, the irony, the lesson, the beauty is that what we've been taught about surrender is that you're making yourself less than, you're losing, you're weak, you're diminished, you disappear. And that's not accurate. And it is. And in that process, which is not accurate and is at the same time, that surrender is a leap of faith, like you said. And in that leap of faith, what you're really doing is affirming that the idea that you have of who you are, I am Dar Dixon, I am Cyrus Copeland, melts away. And you follow that thread of that other person, that other story, that other whatever idea, whatever you're doing, whatever that is. And you realize, oh my God, I'm in that too. Mm-hmm. And then your head starts to expand. Yeah. Your brain, your mind is blown, and you're like, oh my God, wait a minute. And you have to rethink everything. Now, I don't know if every artist goes through this. I think they do. It's not the easiest thing to talk about. Impulse. Right?
I remember when I was writing the scenes of Sadiq Wahb, who was my mother's classmate at Georgetown University and ended up becoming the Ayatollah's right-hand man. When I was writing his scenes, I could swear to holy God that he was around me and in my ear and just whispering. And this has happened a few times in my life where I just think, where did that come from? Mm-hmm. And as you know, when that happens, it happens in often enough for you to really pay attention to it and appreciate it.
What do you think that is?
Oh, I think a couple of things. Okay. Yeah, I think that actually was Sadiq, and that he knew that he was going to show up on the page, and had a vested interest in showing up on the page in a particular way. And so I knew a lot about him. I knew what my mother had told me about him. I knew all that I'd researched from him. I appreciated the complexity of who he was as a human being, and that he believed a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't believe, but he believed it with conviction and purpose and courage. And I respect that. And so I not only was willing to give him the privilege of the benefit of the doubt about all that he believed, because I wanted him to show up in the truth of what he believed and who he was as a genuine multi-inflected character too. But it was for me also a privilege to know that that boundary between this world and the next one can be lifted, and that I can be the beneficiary of whoever has something that they believe so strongly in that they want to show up on my page to show up in my ear. And for me, it's just kind of like taking dictation in a way too, at the same time.
Ooh,
I also think that art and artistic impulse and creativity has an agenda of its own, and a sense of purpose, and wants to exist in this world. And that in that instance, it chose me to kind of come through in that way and through that person. And so it's my responsibility as a writer with an idea of how my own narrative and characters are supposed to unfold, to step aside and give way to that ineffable, inexplicable, mystical, magical process that sometimes reveals itself to you and through you. It's a privilege for me.
Exactly.
When that happens. When was, so you must know this, when was the last time that happened for you, and how did that feel for you?
Happens all the time. I'll tell you what, well, I'll try to answer that. It's hard, see, it's hard to talk about. I'll tell you one of there's a couple things I can say to that. You know, as an actor, you know, I grew up like everyone else did. So as a human being, seeing actors talking about their, you know, they're there to promote their movie or their TV show. And more so with movie stars, they are, you know, they'll say, how did you, you know, like Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man for an old movie, you know, how did you do that? What did you do? And then, you know, they'll start talking about it. And I mean, I can't think of anything more boring. It's kind of, to me, it's insufferably boring. The man's process or the woman's process is their process. And, you know, unless you're an actor, who gives a fuck? What's more interesting is what you just talked about, which is as you do your work, as you do your research, whatever your medium is, at this point, acting for you, writing, you've got to, at some point, step out of yourself. That boundary that you've got between you and that character has to disappear. Or what are you doing? What's the point of anything, right? There's that point in the creative process. So I'll answer that way. The other thing that occurred to me as I was reading last night, they have, and this is old information, probably 60 years old, 70 years old. The human brain is such an incredible instrument that really rarely gets spoken about. It does a little bit in today's world, a little more. There have been some neurologists who have, you know, stepped outside of the academia and tried to become more stars, you know, attention whores. And it's been great. And some of it's just like, okay, but the brain has over the interconnections between all of the millions of neurons and cells in the brain is, I don't even know what the number is. It's the number 1 followed by 15 million ciphers or zeros. That's the number. It's so mind blowing. Like what? It's unbelievable. So why am I bringing that up? In context of having Hobzadeh appear to you while you're writing about him, or, you know, some character from back in the cult days who's no longer with us come to me as I'm talking about it, or from my childhood, my grandparents, or they're just numerous people. We don't really fully understand how the brain works. They, you know, any neurologist and neuroscientist worth their salt will admit that. There's what they know, there's what they know they don't know, and here's the rub with everything, not just in neuroscience in the brain. There's what you don't know that you don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the catch. So
yeah,
I think what happens in those moments when what you just described so eloquently is that you're allowing yourself to, your ego, your idea of who you are, to dissolve into infinite intelligence, the divine, the universe, whatever you want to call it. And in that stillness, allow the information and the messages to start coming through you. And I think that's the totality of what creation is. That sounds so
lovely.
Thank you. I mean,
so lovely. It sounds so lovely because it's so lovely.
It's
And I am
beautiful, isn't it? I mean,
humbled
to me,
anytime we get to experience even a scintilla of a fraction of a whiff of a pipe dream of the truth of that through who we are and what we do.
and
And go ahead.
you know, when I read that and I'm thinking about, good Lord, the number 1 followed by 15 million zeros. That's the number of interconnections in the brain. Clearly, the human brain was not designed merely for the maintenance of the body. Pooping, peeing, eating, heartbeat, blood flow, regulation of hormones, DNA, genetics, ejaculation, conception, creation, birth. Clearly, there's much more that has not been learned and has not been tapped into. And when there's a common conventional thing that's said frequently, we only use 10% of our brain. I think that's the thing is we're missing out on that 90%. And that's where meditation for me comes in, or whatever one's religion is, prayer, meditation, they're really one and the same. You still your mind, you calm your thoughts, you slow down your breathing, and you just exist in that space. And when that happens, you know, in studying, you know, I study comparative religions, and this is what the East seems to be far more advanced in their study of the spirituality and the divine and existence itself. But that's what they talk about when they talk about self-realization, melding into one. And there are no separations, there are no illusion. It's all an illusion. There are no boundaries to anything. And that's such a much more interesting and beautiful place to operate out of than the opposite.
Yeah.
And the opposite doesn't really work very well. I mean, let's be honest. Our world, you know, needs a lot of work. I'll say one more thing. I was listening to a clip of Krishnamurti, who's no longer with us. Very wise guy, happened to be a man, very wise human being. And the interviewer asked him about society and, you know, curing social ills. And he said, and I thought about this myself many times, and I was just interesting. I've never read that from Krishnamurti, and I just saw this 2 days ago or something like that. When we talk about society, right? Where does society start and where do you end? Where do you start and where does society end? What is society? Well, I am society, and society is me. There's no difference there. I helped create the damn thing, right? And so, although I do rail against the system, and I, you know, some would call me a social justice warrior, whatever the devil that means, fighting for, you know, diversity and inclusion and equality for all peoples. What a concept! To fight in those, to try to solve like that outer ring of being in social ills and injustices is important, but you're never going to solve anything that way, because all you're going to be doing is trying to put out that fire and then put out that fire and then try to straighten that crooked thing. And what Krishnamurti had said, and I thought about this before, not that I'm trying to equate myself to him, but in order for us to heal society and be the change we want to see, like Gandhi said, you have to get our own houses in order, right? Like the great Rumi said, one of our brothers, an Iranian from many, many centuries ago, ask all of yourself. The entire universe exists inside of you. So if you get your own house in order and you listen to that and you try to get in touch with that, which is what we've been talking about, by that way will I become what I wish to see in society, and others can see that in me, and the effect will begin to manifest outwardly. And I think that's really all art really is.
Yeah, the profundity of that very, very simple, exquisite truth is never lost on me. I love that. I have loved the truth of that for a long, long time. conveniently, we get lost in the battles that we fight with people who disagree with us, and it's much easier to fight those fights than to fight the internal fight, that battle, which is a much more productive challenge. I think is to turn that lens consistently and ever inward. How do you do that though? How do you do that without becoming too solipsistic, too self-referential, too belly-gazing? What's the right balance for you? What's the right balance for you?
First of all, I don't have the answer. And anyone who says they do is either trying to sell you something or just lying to you straight out. And it's frequently a mixture of that plus a little something else. You know, I'm a work in progress, man. For me, I meditated. And so I say I cheat. I use something that's called Holosync. They sponsor this podcast. And they use binaural beats in your ears. You put in earphones. And I'm actually wearing a very special pair of earphones that can handle really ultra low frequencies that you can't hear with your ear because of them. Anyway, from the first time you ever use this Holosync, you meditate as deeply, if not deeper, than a Buddhist monk who's been doing it for 35 years. And I was like, that sounds like some bullshit. But if all the things they say are going to work, I'll try it. So I did, and it's been amazing. Meditating has helped me keep from becoming what you just said, like just a belly gazer and self-referencing all the time, because that's death. And a lot of people get trapped up in that self-reference world. And it's very apparent when you sit and listen to them talk. You think to yourself, they said something like, well, that's your experience of it, man. Mm-hmm. There are like 8 billion plus of us on this planet. What about all of us? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. The only thing I can say to that is expand your awareness. And that's what meditation does. It expands your awareness. I am a modern man, and I want to get results faster because I know I have a limited time on this life. I lost 20 years in a cult, and that's always in the back of my mind, pushing me. So like I'm a late bloomer in that respect, and I knew that I needed some help. So expand your awareness. And Carl Jung said very eloquently, awareness in and of itself is transformative. In plain language, the greater your awareness, the more you will be able to transform / solve any problem situation you have, or to see what the most resourceful outcome would be. And that's certainly been true for me. And I still fuck up all the time.
Congratulations. Good. That's what makes you interesting. Please continue to keep fucking up.
I don't think I will
the other thing that
Carl, in that regard.
I adore you, Dariush. You can't fuck up enough for me. The other thing that Carl Jung said, which I think is really relevant to this discussion, this idea about the shadow, and the need we all have to embrace our shadows instead of castigate it and judge it. The very thing that you are embarrassed about inside of yourself or fearful of inside of yourself is the thing that you need to hold closest to you. And he said that the way to do that, his words were very interesting to me as an Iranian American, because his words, I'm misquoting him right now, but they were basically something like, to heal yourself, you have to embrace the devil. And speaking on behalf of the great Satan and the axis of evil, this idea of holding dear the thing that you are most fearful of has been a lifelong challenge for me, but one that I never stop not loving or appreciating. That challenge, I think, is one of the things that
I think the quote you're referring to
faces right now. right? We're such a fearful,
100%.
polarized nation. How do we hold dear the thing that we really judge about all the people who don't agree with us? Well, what you just said earlier about starting inside and recognizing whatever shreds of the thing that you judge inside of everybody else still exists inside of you is a really good place to start for us as a country.
I couldn't agree with you more. See, it's interesting. I told you this was going to happen. In meeting Donsley and falling in love with Donsley and marrying her, I had to deal with the fact that this woman who is Black in America, regardless of her front row seat to the civil rights movement, has a unique and unfair, disgusting experience every day of her life just because of the color of her skin. And then that journey caused me to start going in and be like, oh my God, what's going on with me? What about all these things that I think? And what about all these things that I've been taught, and the way that the conventional wisdom and the conventional narrative and it's all insanity. It's all based in this systemic and institutionalized racism. Okay, so stop for a second. Why am I talking about this? For me, having to deal with my own racist tendencies and beliefs. Now, I'm not running around saying the N-word. I'm not burning crosses. I'm not swastikas. I'm not white power. None of that stuff, never have been. And I still had a boatload of racism flowing through my veins and through my brain, my mind. It's impossible for any person in this country to say that they are not racist.
Right.
They can try, but that's disingenuous. And that goes back to what you just said. How are we going to heal this? Well, and I didn't mean for this to happen. I just knew that this is unacceptable. And it's a bitter pill to swallow. It's a bitter pill to swallow. By embracing and acknowledging those racist ideologies in my mind, I'm not going to judge how they got there, why they got there, or anything, but just in embracing those things, I began to view the world in a whole new way. And then there's the other part of it, just like when she and I go anywhere, just take the dog for a walk through, streets of Los Angeles or Beverly Hills or wherever. I told you a couple stories about that off camera. Racism, everyone thinks, well, I didn't say the N-word and I'm not lobbing Molotov cocktails and I'm not burning a cross. And that's about as far as most white people go in terms of what racist means, right? Racism exists in those acts, to be certain. But that, again, that's lazy and that's cheap and that's dismissive. It's so obvious, right? Where it really happens is in a million microaggressions, just little cuts, 1,000 cuts every day. Dirty looks, getting cut in front of in line, being spoken to aggressively, demeaningly, having to wait even though you were there first, allowing a white person to come in ahead of you, allowing a man to come ahead of you if you're a Black woman. Like all of that whole process of going through all of that, going within myself to heal myself. I mean, it changed everything. And interestingly, it helped me in my recovery from the cult. Because I had to, at some point, realize that not only had I been brainwashed, mind controlled in the cult, which definitely happened, I've been brainwashed by society. We all have. That's another bitter pill to swallow.
Oh.
But in doing that, it's made me more at peace with myself, more comfortable in my own skin, infinitely more empathetic. And I think I was pretty empathetic to begin with, but it was nothing compared to where it is now. And it's strengthened and enriched my relationships with all people, but definitely people of color in ways that I never would have imagined, ever, in the most beautiful ways. And so that's why I always push that narrative. This whole thing with Trump, this whole thing we're going through right now, it's nothing but racism, which is at the core of America. The White House should be called the Black House. It was built on the backs of slaves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Black History Month? Shit. That's for white people. Black Americans know Black history is American history. And without it, America is nothing like what you see today. It wouldn't be nearly as rich, nearly as colorful, nearly as valuable. It just wouldn't be. And that goes for Latino and Asian and Middle Eastern cultures like the Iranians.
Yep.
Across the board. And that's not even beginning to get into sexual identity, sexual, I don't even know. I mean, like, I feel like a dinosaur. I thought I knew because I've got 3 gay brothers that I knew about that. And I do know about that world, but I really don't know. You know,
well, it's
now
those are kind of, I know, how many different consonants can they add on to LGBT and ways of distinguishing and gerrymandering our own identities. I don't know. And we live in such an interesting time, you and I, that all this is happening, that all this is kind of happening. And it's
glad
happening,
you said that.
Everything just kind of seems to be building to a full rolling boil right now. I'll take 2 steps back, Dariush. I love the story that you're telling, and I love it, the perspective that you're telling it from, because you know, people have told the story about what it's like to be in a cult before. People have told the story of what it's like to confront racism. People have told the story of what it means to be brainwashed from theoretic and academic and psychological perspectives. And people have told the story about Iran and America. But you have, and all those things that are part and parcel of who you are. And that's what one of the things that makes your story just interesting and unique. And it's why I asked you before, and I would continue to kind of ask you this question to ask yourself about: what is the through line? Where did you start up? Not a kind of in your life, but in regard to the themes that you want to explore. And what were the points of the plot points in your own life, the revelations and epiphanies that delivered you from there to where you are right now? And maybe you're not even finished. Maybe your right now is only right now. But that 5 years from now, this story will reveal itself to you in a very different way. And all you can do is to just tell the story as best you can, and to notice where your own energy is going. All of that energy, whether that energy is clarity of thought or unreconciled emotions, or how you feel about what's going on about in the world right now, vis-a-vis your own personal themes in your life, all of that counts. That energy is, I don't like that word. It's got this new age sensibility to it, but that energy has an intelligence to it, and you don't know how it works, but it always knows where it wants to end up.
But it's unsettling because it's frequently not in line with what you thought you wanted it to be, or where you thought you wanted it to end up. Right. Yeah, it's strange.
Those are frustrating moments if you have plotted out your book and your life. And or there are moments that kind of call you to have greater faith in your own artistic process. I know you don't like that word, but I'm going to use it anyway. To just have greater faith.
No, I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with
it. Really? Yeah. You just don't like it when Dustin Hoffman talks about his.
Let me ask you this. You're writing a new book, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. It looks like the internet connection is a little wonky on your end. You froze for a second. So can you talk about what your new book's about a little bit? Are you comfortable doing that? Or
sure,
I don't know what stage you're at.
It's an interfaith book in which I explore different aspects of each of the world religions. And it's a book that's kind of taken me across the world and will continue to do so once this weird chapter of COVID ends. in exploration of interfaith themes. I have thus far been in Bali writing about Hinduism, in Sri Lanka about Buddhism, and on the Camino exploring Christianity and the Christian idea of grace. By the way, actually, this is something I wanted to mention when you were talking about what happens when you were talking about the brain and all those kind of weird, wonderful ways that the brain works, that we really have tapped into 10% of that, in conjunction with this line between yourself and the world falling away. When I was walking the Camino, did I tell you this story? I'm having deja vu right now. When I was walking the Camino, there's this midsection called the Meseta. Oh, no, I told you another Camino tale. There's the midsection of the Camino, which is called the Meseta, which is where you don't see any trees and where it's just one endless horizon of wheat. And
I'm going to ask
that sounds
you to
really
tell people who might not know what the Camino is.
Oh, what the Camino is. So the Camino is a 500-mile pilgrimage that you walk. It's the most popular pilgrimage route in all of Christendom. And you start it typically in France, in Saint-Jean, Pied-de-Port. You cross over you walk over the Pyrenees, and then you walk across Spain, and you end up in Santiago de Compostela, which is where St. James, who is Jesus's right-hand man, is buried. People have been walking this route for over 1,000 years. And the route fell into disrepair, but in the 1970s, it was kind of rediscovered, and now it's very popular again. So I had heard about the Camino for a long time, and I love the idea of pilgrimage, and I love the idea of hiking. It's a very friendly hike. It's not that arduous. In fact, you can actually pay people to carry your bags from one stop to another, so that you don't even have to do the backpack thing if you don't want to. And I did not. So, like, for $4 a day, you can basically have a lovely little jaunt across Spain. It takes 40 days to walk. It's 500 miles. It is exhausting at points. And the Meseta, which is the midsection of the Camino, is one of those points. So I was walking along this dusty path, and in my mind, out of nowhere, I saw the green and white cover of a book that I had read several years before called Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. It's about vegetarianism, the philosophies behind it, the reasons for it. This was apropos of nothing. I hadn't been discussing vegetarianism with anybody. I hadn't even thought about that book, much less the cover of that book, for years. Well, months anyway. And I thought, well, that's odd. I wonder where that came from. Several miles later, I pulled into a dusty little town, and I did what pilgrims do, which is I found an open bar, and I sat myself down and I ordered a cold soda. And I turned around, and there on the table behind me was that book, with that exact cover that I had seen in my mind's eye several miles back. Now, how does stuff like that happen? Is that one of the 1 to 15 gazillion neurons that's kind of firing in my brain? Is that I kind of took a step forward in time and saw something and brought that little detail back from the future? Or did I create that in some weird way by thinking about it, and now it manifested itself several hours and miles ahead of me? I don't know. And I may never know. But in that small instance, I got an idea about how wonderfully whimsical and magical the world can be when you give yourself over to it in that way. And when the veil of the illusion of time or distance, or this idea that we're all kind of existing on the space-time continuum, you just kind of step a little bit outside of that, and you realize that this brain that you have can work in myriad ways. And that was one of those playful ways that I kind of got the simple truth of what you were talking about. Now, it wasn't particularly purposeful. I wasn't meant to read that book, I don't think, because I picked it up and I thought, and I started reading it there, and I thought, I know this. This has no resonance for me. I already believe this. I am already a vegetarian, well, pescatarian. But I think that it was just one of those ways that the world plays with you and gets you to kind of reconsider this idea that you know exactly the way everything works. Make room for a little bit of magic in your life is what I think that was all about.
I'd agree. I think it's all those things. I think that as I'm listening to you say that, did you manifest it? Okay. Everyone says, "Oh, I manifested it." Okay.
Right.
Because it's not how it works. You don't just think of something and magically it appears. But in another sense, yes. However, it's all those things, right? Time and space. I remember when I was studying religions and Christianity and the cross, the symbolism of the cross. That I don't remember who introduced it, but the cross was representative of time and space, and that's why Jesus was nailed to the cross and ultimately died on the cross. But then I started to investigate. I'm less interested in that whole narrative because it has been fantasized and twisted 7,000 ways to Sunday. And that's no disparagement to anyone who's a Christian. It just, like you just said, doesn't resonate with me. You're missing the point, in my humble opinion. But I started to think about time and space, and they're really just constructs of the human mind. And it's something we've all bought into, that there is time and there is space. And the reality is there is no time and there is no space, which is why moments like that happen. And then when it happens, I say the same thing you said. I don't know why. I don't know how. I think we do know. I think that we're greater than we want to give ourselves credit for. I think we know more than we want to give ourselves credit for knowing. I think that we have more power than we ever want to acknowledge, because when you do that, you're starting to take responsibility and ownership of yourself, your mind, and your body. And that's where, that's really the basis of all religion. Sorry, spoiler alert, I just ruined it for you. But that's what I've learned. That's really the basis of all religion. They'd say in Christianity, you're made in the image and likeness of your creator, God, right? And why does God always have to be male? Why do all these religious figures always have to be male? Because I don't know, last I checked, no male ever gave birth to a damn thing. But I digress. But I think that's what the narrative is all about. And instead of getting caught up.
I love that digression, Daryush. And I would second that. Why is it that all of the prophets have been male? Is it because there have been female prophets and we haven't paid attention to them? Is it because there's something that is that estrogen and divinity don't go together? I doubt that.
Well, see, that's the implicit communication. It's never said explicitly, but the implicit communication, it's all based in misogyny and patriarchy.
Yeah.
Anyway, listen, to that point, have there been female, what did you say?
Prophets?
Prophets. I can't speak to prophets, but I can speak to saints. Yes, I can speak to saints. Yes. I met a saint.
You have?
And she was my mother-in-law.
Really?
Yeah, my mother-in-law. Yeah. I think by any definition, she would be a saint.
Why? How so?
Look what she did. Look at her life. Look what she did. Look at everything she gave and sacrificed to her last breath. Just the most remarkable human being I've ever met in my life. Ever.
Did she consider herself inspired by divinity? Did she think of herself in that way?
No. I don't talk about this. See, you get me talking. I do this episode. This is the Cyrus Copeland episode experience, and now we're talking about me. I wanted to meet a saint. I thought if I met a saint, that might be a really good thing. Let's just leave it at that, you know? And I just, like, how do you do that? Because first of all, the ones that the churches and stuff are calling saints, like my first thing, my skepticism kicks in like, yeah, sure, blow it out your ass, right? I wasn't looking actively, I wasn't thinking about it. And one day it hit me, I would say like 3, 4, 5 years ago, whatever. Like, my God, if I called her mother, she insisted I called her mother. She wouldn't let me call her by her first name. She disdained being called by her first name by me. And I was like, okay. So I called her mother. I was like, if mother isn't a saint, I mean, dude, are you kidding me? She could have she could have packed her bags in and folded up and, said the hell with all this 100 times over. And she never did. She came from the wealthiest Black family in Alabama. They're the biggest landowners in all of Alabama. Her family was very well off. And she marries this guy, Ralph Abernathy, and, he's a preacher and he's a mathematician and he's a doctor of divinity. And then he meets this other guy named Martin King. And then the rest is history, right? Like, she needs that, like she needs a hole in her head. Mm-hmm. She's got a baby girl, my sister-in-law. She was about 1.5. She's pregnant with my wife, 6 months pregnant. And one night she's watching the old Tonight Show called Jack Parr back in the day. And this was in 1957. And the Klan hooked a bomb up to the house and tried to blow up the house and just missed the gas main by a few inches. Otherwise, they'd have been successful. Miraculously, she was not killed. Nor was my Wandolin, the toddler, my sister-in-law, and Donzale. But when Donzale was born, she shook for the first 6 months of her life. Her hands and her feet would tremble. She couldn't hold the bottle. When they changed her diaper, her feet would just be shaking. The trauma. And even to this day, if it gets loud, Donzale gets wigged out. Anyway, I think about all those things, and I could go on and on and on and on about that. But the things that she endured and the choices she made and the sacrifices she made, not for herself, but as she would say, for my people. I mean, I get choked up thinking about it. So yeah, they exist. And I met one, and she was a Black woman. Surprise, surprise. She would never admit to that. She'd look at me, oh, Dar, you're crazy. But, I've met the ones that they've called saints, some of them. Not impressive people. Yeah.
Who have you met that self-identified as a saint, or that retroactively was identified by the church as a saint? And what was that like?
What was that guy's name? It wasn't by the church. I don't want to know if I want to say
I have to tell you, I've been thinking about a little bit about this and what it means to be a saint and what are the requirements for sainthood. In Christianity, you have to have performed at least 2 miracles, I think, and to have those on record. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are a wondrous person. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. I was going to go on and disparage one particular female saint, but I'm not going to do that.
Oh, God,
oh, you know
so
what I will
upset.
say though? No. That would not have been good. Saint Teresa of Davila was in contention with being the patron saint of Spain several centuries back. And somehow James won that battle. But she herself was this kind of wondrous, mystical person who was given over to bouts of intense devotional mysticism and extreme love for God that you and I might identify with, for example, Rumi's poetry. You know, he's got that real devotional, I love God, I'm a drunkard looking to get drunk on the wine of my love for God, all that stuff. She was that. And this devotional quality that the Persian mystic, that the Persian poets had, that Saint Teresa of Davila had, is for me a much more interesting measure of sainthood and the presence of divinity than certain other saints that I was going to call into conversation, but won't. I wish I had met your mother-in-law.
Yeah, you do.
I wish
you absolutely do. Yeah, she's remarkable. Anyone, you know, her legacy will live on forever, and everyone who knows her would speak of her pretty much similar to what I did, and will till my last breath. You know, it's interesting. The reason I hemmed and hawed about you know, saint and this and that, you know, the church has qualifications for you to be called a saint. Who the fuck is the church? You know what I mean? Like, and this goes for any religion, right? These are man-made constructs, and they are not created to uplift anyone that I've ever seen. Although they like to say they do, I see them cause more divisiveness, more shame, more guilt, and more fear than the opposite of that, which is unfortunate. So when we go to describing what a saint is and what a saint isn't, this is me. This is, you know, the ABCs of me. I have a problem with an institution that is like the Catholic Church, for example. You know, the Catholic Crusades, no one ever likes to talk about. The Christian Crusades, no one likes to talk about. You know, violence, murder, torture, maiming, beheading. I mean, the most horrific stuff. But love Jesus, you know, and it goes for any religion. So that's why I hesitate to say, you know, like, well, you have to perform miracles. Well, who are you to tell me what a miracle is and isn't? All right. And we can take that to the abstract and go, well, then what are we going to have as a baseline? Fair enough. But it just, for me, follow that person's footsteps. Their actions speak far louder than their words. And I'll say this, and I think that's why you didn't say anything about the person that you were going to disparage. Most saints talk a great game, and that's as far as it goes. That's as far as it goes.
This person that I was going to, there was also a lot of ego that went with her. That I just find
isn't that interesting how that
attractive coefficient to her divinity. I don't think ego is supposed to be the coefficient to divinity. I think divinity is divinity, and that's it. And with divinity comes humility, not ego.
Ever.
Maybe that's not fair, Dariush. Maybe it's just not fair to not expect saints to be people too, and full of the, you know, the glorious flaws of humanity. And who the heck wants to be in a relationship with somebody who's perfect anyway? If you're perfect, what are you doing here? You're done. Get lost.
Get lost.
This world is for us who are still evolving, and
that's every one of us.
Yeah, the flaws come as part of that. Maybe that's the problem, is that we have vested our heroes with not with humanity, but with this really unrealistic idea of heroism or sainthood that is just setting them up to fail.
100%.
And setting ourselves up for disappointment.
100%. Someone, you know, many people used to approach me, and sometimes still do, much less because I've become more vocal about it. Why don't you run for office? You know, you're well-spoken and, you know, you look nice and blah, blah. Man, are you fucking kidding me? Listen to how I talk. Every other word I'm cursing. Every other conversation I'm talking about abstract, esoteric things. And then I'm burping and farting in the next minute. And then I want to watch a football game. And then I'll get bored midway through that and watch a documentary on Chagall. You know? Like, how are you going to follow? What am I going to run? And in this country, you know, like you just said, they put everyone on a pedestal. And that pedestal, people forget, can get removed. And that really is the purpose of putting someone on a pedestal, is to just, as soon as they show that they're human and they have flaws and they have things they haven't worked out yet, or they, swear a lot or whatever, then they knock you down.
That's one of the reasons why I'm so heartened by the existence of people like AOC in Washington, is that she really just kind of explores the full spectrum of her humanity. Just came out today and talked about, or was it yesterday, and was talking about being the survivor of, she just brings all of herself to the table, and all of her honesty and all of her opinions. And I'm just so deeply grateful for her example for the rest of everybody else in Washington. I hope that they pay attention to that and realize that this is also a way that you can lead, is by showing us your full humanity in that way. And also being a warrior on behalf of the downtrodden. She does that really well, but she also kind of shows her wounds, and that's lovely.
I'll tell you what, let's end this now, because I know you and I we could go for 5 hours. Easy.
How long have we
lemon
gone on,
squeeze.
by the way?
No idea. I can't see. I'm recording this on my phone. I'm sure we're at about an hour and a half, maybe coming up on 2.
Okay.
But in that regard, AOC showing her vulnerabilities, talking about how scared she was, that they actually came into her office and she was behind the door, and then sharing that triggered her sexual assault that she survived, and all these traumas, continue on. Back to my mother-in-law, a profound moment that I'd not thought about happened when they stormed the Capitol in the 6th. These absolute racist kooks, the insurrection. Took me back to 2007. Gonzalez, myself, and my mother-in-law. My sister-in-law flew from Germany and brought my nephew, who was just 9 years old at the time. And we went out to Virginia to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Niagara movement, which most people are like, what? The Niagara movement was the that was the birth of the NAACP, the modern day NAACP. And it was started by, amongst other people, credited most to W.E.B. Du Bois, a light-skinned black man, Harvard grad, incredibly intelligent, who wanted to fight for equality and justice. So there we are, and we're having this thing, and it goes for, like, I think it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday was kind of a half a day. And it was hot as hot could be. And my wife had written this piece about John Brown, the abolitionist, and I played John Brown. And since we're in the business, I went to, the costume place, Western Costume out here in Burbank, and I went and got this wool suit. So I looked like John Brown. And my wife, I got her something. She wore some like petticoat and the whole thing, right? Because we put on, it was a little, like, I don't know, 10, 15-minute play we put on. And then my sister-in-law, who's a trained opera singer, sang Negro spirituals. It was so powerful and beautiful. Okay, so that's the setting. My mother-in-law was there, and she was going to give a Q&A the next day. I think we performed on Friday, and then my mother-in-law was going to be on a panel, the head of the panel, but there were several people. She was one of the dignitaries to speak about her experience, in the civil rights movement and then NAACP, et cetera, et cetera. Well, these white supremacists showed up. These racists showed up. These Klansmen showed up. And skinheads seemed to be like the order of the day. Confederate flags, swastikas, all kinds of stuff. There were probably, I want to say at least 200 or 300 of them showed up, and we were under a tent, this magnificent big tent, and there were a lot of people there. And I think it was the Capitol Police, because there were senators and Congress people there as well. They'd showed up, a few, and they showed up to protect them. Not so much the black
Uh,
folk whose lives were at stake, but, you know, the law. And they showed up in full black body armor, riot gear, helmets, AR-15s, you know, and there were, if there were 200 of those Peckerwoods, there were 300 cops. And it was tense. We showed up and they're all there and screaming, yelling, and all this stuff. And everyone's starting to like, well, you know, I don't know. The white people are like, you know, and we should maybe not do this, and this could be bad. And my mother-in-law, I mean, she's amazing. I said something to her like a fool. I think I did, or maybe I did. Maybe it was someone else got to it first, but I was thinking the same thing. Just going to let you know right now. Maybe we should pack this shit up and get out of here. She says in full voice, and mind you, Juanita was about 5'2" on a good day, maybe 5'3". She had an intensity to her and a fire and a strength to her that I have not seen in any man. I've seen a lot of people affect that stance and that strength and that courage. It's a whole different thing when you're 6'5", 260 pounds of muscle and, you know, whatever else, compared to a little 5'2" black woman. And she goes, I'm not going anywhere, with that intensity. And I was like, oh shit. I knew it was coming next. I was like, oh shit. I have fought too hard. I have been through too much. I'm not turning back. You aren't going to scare me. And she's screaming at these white boys and these white women. And everyone's turning around to take note. And the senators and the Congress people are turning around. And all of a sudden, they found their spine and they found their strength. And they straightened up and they smoothed out their hair. And don't you know, we carried on.
Isn't that nice?
I went through the whole day. The little black woman said, not today.
She gave them their spine. Yep.
That's right. Not today. So I think we're on the right path by having more females in our government.
Yeah, me too.
It's time for a female president, clearly. Many more senators and Congress people, as mayor, as well as mayors and council people in each individual city. But there's a long way to go. We got a lot of work to do. And the beat goes on, as I like to say. Cyrus, thank you for doing this. You're going to have to come back.
Oh, wow. I love talking to you. I just love talking to you, Dariush. First of all, it's very easy. You're so charismatic and so charming and so interesting and so easy to talk to. You're just really easy to talk to. So just thank you. Thank you.
Well, right back at you. Thank you. You are a very intelligent, very thoughtful guy. And we share history and we share.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways, as we've talked about today. And I know one thing, I spoke to it wasn't your classmate, but a friend of mine who you may or may not remember. Debbie Street was her maiden name. Now her last name is Machen.
Yeah, her mom is actually going through.
Her mom just took a terrible fall. Yeah, poor thing, broke both of her arms, fractured her neck, facial bones, and broke her ankle. Yeah, poor thing. So, but I told her I was going to speak with you today, and she was like, "Oh my God, I love Cyrus. He's so interesting." And I was like, "I agree."
So sweet. Give her a hug from me. Tell her I'm going to wing a couple of prayers skyward for her mom. Give Donzale a big hug for me too. I only met her once, but she radiates such a lovely light and warmth to her. And I think I told you this. Her dad's eulogy was in my first book.
You told me that,
or my second book. Did I tell you that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just another lovely connection.
I wish I had a chance to meet Reverend. I really do. That would have been.
Oh my God, what a beautiful writer. And I'm guessing profoundly good speaker he was too. I say that because I think.
Yeah. I mean, when you go, when your best friend's Martin Luther King, and even, I mean, like if you ever go and listen to Reverend's sermons or when he spoke, not in the church, you know, out in public. I mean, my God, one of the best orators of all time. Then you have Martin Luther King speaking. Like, I mean, what are we going to say? I mean, Uncle Martin was amazing. I remember he went to go do a speech one time, And they kept calling for Martin, kept calling for Martin, kept calling for Martin during Reverend, my father-in-law is speaking. And he's like, man, what got on the phone? He's like, look, man, you got to get down here. These are your people. They want to hear you. He goes like, no, you do it. You do it. You got to, no, man, they want you. And that was the time where they made the agreement that he would be in front of and do the speaking, and Reverend would step back and, strategize, because that was what was going to move. Talk about getting your ego out of the way. That was, Martin didn't want to do that. He would rather have been in the background and let Ralph be up front. Ralph would rather have been in the foreground and let Martin, they switched because it was going to progress and move their agenda for the people forward. There you go.
Yeah. What a great friendship. What a wonderful strategic understanding of the power that each of them brought to their game was.
I could talk about that for hours, what I've learned about that. That's amazing. But yeah, listen, promise me we're going to do this again.
Give Donzilla a hug for me. I would love to. I love talking to you. Are you kidding?
Okay.
It's the pleasure's entirely mine.
Hug, Mama Copeland.
Big hug, big hug.
Yeah.
I'll give her a
tell
hug.
Katayun, if you watch this, when you see this, hi, sweetheart. I miss you. I hope you're well.
She loves you too.
Yeah.
All right. Big hug, Azizam.
All right.